Welcome to Growing Pains, a show about learning how to grow and scale an organization from generally from Series A to Series B, but sometimes from that first little angel investor all the way to Series B. And I'm talking today with David Sobel, who is himself a very accomplished entrepreneur who started an MSP and grew it and grew it and grew it through the Virginia area and has now and sold to a larger company and has been with larger companies from there, but is now running a great podcast, and one of which is called Hitting It or Killing It. Dave, why don't you tell us a bit about both of those podcasts?
Oh, sure. So my flagship show is The Business of Tech, which is a daily news and commentary show focused on the delivery of IT services. I do another show with two other fellow IT guys from the IT services space called Killing It, where we break down big ideas in technology and kind of play with ideas and see what we can reassemble and have a little fun while we're doing it. And I always sort of describe it, if Business of Tech is Sports Center, then Killing It is Pardon the Interruption.
Okay, and there's something about sitting around the basement talking or something like that
It
too, right?
really is that. There's a lot of good podcasts of guys sitting around talking, and we have one of those too.
So let's go back to the earlier stages. What got you to start a company like that?
Well, so I started my managed services firm, partly because it was late '90s, early aughts, right? And I'd written a couple of tech startups up and down during the dot coms,
Yeah.
and the last one went down in a fiery blaze of glory, and they laid off the entire development staff, of which I was one of the leaders in. And the lesson I walked away was that management gets to keep their jobs. And I could run a company into a wall just as much as those morons could, but I got
Right.
to keep my job.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. Right.
like
Well,
every
sometimes
good,
keep the debt, but
well, fair enough, but I was a little younger too, and
yeah.
but as any entrepreneur knows, a little bit of good cockiness will get you a long way, right?
Right.
And I just had this idea of like, well, I'm smarter than those guys. I've got idea, like I can do something with it. And I set out to say I wasn't quite sure what kind of firm I wanted to launch. And I sort of, like a good entrepreneur, you scramble, you figure something out. And I quickly figured I was like, oh, I could do something in helping organizations with their technology, particularly small and mid-sized organizations. Like I know a lot. I know a ton about this space and the delivery and how it's put together and how to make it work. I'll do something there. And I told my then
Right.
fiance at the time, it's like either something will come of this or I will go get a job. And we landed our first managed services client within about 45 days of launching the firm.
Fantastic. And what got you that first customer? I mean, that's the critical part, right?
Connections, it was it
Okay.
was and it's a good pitch combined with connections, right? Is I
Right.
knew what I wanted to do. I knew the problem that I wanted to solve. I wanted to be more proactive about the way we did IT. And put it in context, this was 2002, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a much newer idea, being proactive about that and using internet-based technology and monitoring technologies to help customers be ahead of problems. And I also knew somebody who was in healthcare who was working with a cancer care facility
Okay.
who we connected the dots there and said, this is a really good idea. And he was working on some imaging technology stuff. Well, you need a good network to do that. It was a great partnership. We pitched together. I landed my first deal.
Yeah. And did you have like you're very much a technical founder? Did you have go-to-market support with you to go from there? I mean, one customer, one relationship, was it were you accounting on referrals from that, or did you actually have a go-to-market strategy that was going to be, this is how we're going to kill it with SEO and
Oh,
on and
I
on?
wish I could say I was way more organized. And by the way, again, 2002, 2003 timeframe for this.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you're
What's
not spending a
SEO?
right. You're not spending a lot of time thinking
How
about
about a
SEO.
brochure?
Right. The strategy was, let's go pound the chambers of commerce and like,
Okay.
get out in the community and work. We were expecting referrals, but it was around like, let's get out and talk to business owners.
Right.
I made a reasonably safe assumption that most business owners didn't think a ton about their technology investments and were not particularly organized about it. Again,
Hmm.
dating myself back in 2002, 2003, that was very much true during that time frame. You
Yep.
had some computers, you weren't particularly thoughtful and strategic about the way you use that. So it's
Mhm.
pretty good pitch, and got me in a lot of doors. And then you could have conversations about, let's talk about security, let's talk about backup and data protection, let's talk about monitoring, let's make sure that all the systems are working right, let's make sure your people are getting help like in an organized way.
Right.
Like
Right.
it, and it was, those were new ideas that morphed into what we now call managed services.
Okay. Okay. And were you in a very competitive environment? Were there a lot of people competing for the same business, or was it you were the guy who knew the shit and hey, talk to Dave, he's really good. Is that how did
Can
that
it
work out?
can it be both at the same time? Because
Yeah.
it's I live just outside DC.
Right.
So Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland were my target areas. This is a pretty tech
Yeah.
friendly and invest. So there were a lot of technology companies here even then.
Mhm.
So I never thought that this was not a savvy audience that understood the bits, but at the same time, we were pretty cutting edge in the way we were leveraging and talking about internet technologies. I was using open source technologies to do monitoring and management well before anybody was talking about that. I mean, I eventually replaced it with a commercial product, but it was cobbled together stuff that we put together ourselves
Right.
that did it.
Right.
So
Okay.
I had the combination of like a tech savvy audience at some level, but where this wasn't a thing that they were doing. So it was good timing for when I launched.
Okay. And any vertical specific that you were trying to go after because you started in the healthcare, did you stick in that?
Early days were all about anybody with money,
Okay.
and and on top of that, the basic idea was small and mid-sized companies. Like, and
Yeah.
particularly, I had this idea of like, well, I'm a small company, right? I'm like one guy starting in his house. Like, you go after like likes like, right? So
Right.
you talk with other small business owners who feel your pain, who you can empathize with a little, right? I never had this thought that I was going to go in and deal with a three-letter acronym company, like or three-letter acronym government organization. I was never delusional like that, but it was more the like, let's go after small businesses. It feels like fertile ground. There's lots
Yeah.
of them, right? There's
Yeah.
always lots of them, and so it felt like a really good place to start, and thus I spent a good portion of my career now thinking about smaller companies.
And so that's an interesting spot because it's a great place to start because it's a soft belly, but it's hard to scale because they're so individualized and they're you can't it's hard to find the pattern recognition that can get you to a scale. I mean, that Peter Thiel book, Zero to One, always talks about the black hole of the middle. There's the individual deals and then there's the big enterprise deals, but in the middle, the SME business is the hardest one to penetrate at scale.
Yeah, isn't it great? Like it's
Yeah.
like well, because by the way, like too many people, like this is one of my like things that I always get hung up on is the moment anybody brings in scale, it's like, well, yeah, okay, but you've also just like eliminated a huge portion of the business by worrying about perfection of scale. Right?
Mm,
What you just said is just like you say, well, at the big end, you've got this scale, and then like and then there's this big bit in the middle. And I'll smile and go, yeah, it's a big bit in the middle, everybody.
huge
There's a lot of money in there. And
bit.
and if you but you're eliminating by saying, well, it doesn't perfectly allow scalability. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I can build a really, really healthy business in there.
with a big
Uh,
chunk.
right, within that big chunk. I don't have to be like massively scalable to build a
Right.
really high value business with good margins and good like economics, good basic economics in that middle bit. That's why a lot of people do it.
Right, right. I guess where I was going is that the um like a how would I say it? And I get what you're saying. I mean, it is the massive middle. Like 90, like in IT services, 97% is in that SME space, right?
Yep, right,
It's huge.
exactly. It's huge.
Uh, and
And
and we're kind of in the same boat. There's the Upwork crowd that wants just a gig worker who's just doing a front end or a website, and then there's the CGIs and the Capgeminis and the Deloittes that are doing the big digital transformation. And in the middle, everybody who needs outsourcing, they don't know where to start and where to go. And there's all these middle ground
right.
boutiques that are trying to get that business, and they're just noise in an inbox.
And this is
I
where I
see what
think
you're
it does
saying.
Yeah, this is where I think it does get interesting because I pick on the scalable phrase because it gets the thinking going. We like
Right.
against, but what I also will focus on is good process implementation
Yes.
builds scalable businesses, right? But
Right.
in a kind of very traditional way of thinking about it. I think about, because most, particularly technology firms lately, always talk about hockey stick growth, right?
Right.
And they assume hockey stick growth because that's what we're chasing in scalability. And I go,
Yep.
yeah, I can actually build a hockey stick business without having to do what you're doing. And the way that I do that is I build a good core business where
Yeah.
I'm trying to be engaged with my customers on a monthly recurring basis with services.
Right.
If I'm really good at retention by being good at delivering the service, I build a yearly cohort every single year that stacks on top of one another. And that
Okay.
stacking process starts creating the hockey stick
The
because by
cohort of customers that are similar business and similar
that
issues,
have
or
no that has simply stayed with me based on the when they started with me.
okay. Okay.
And that's interesting. Like that's the bit that you think about is like my after say 7 years of running a business, I have
Right.
customers that have been with me since year one, and then I
Yeah.
stack on top of them the ones from year two, and then the
Right.
ones from year three, and then the ones from year four, and then all of a sudden, well, funny, that looks like a hockey stick in terms of the way that
Yeah.
I've stacked my bid. Now it takes me longer to get there, right,
Right.
than somebody that's doing it. But by the way, it's incredibly stable. Like it's a
Right.
really stable business where I'm engaging with a lot of people very systematically.
So a highly, it's really a slow growth services business where people talk about scale, especially in venture, is CAC over LTV and a formulaic view of how much marketing I throw in is going to get me how much customers, and I'm going to scale my revenue, my top line. They forget about churn.
Right, they totally forget about churn.
And you haven't forgotten about churn, and that is where the bottom you're keeping the bottom solid, so you're continuously stacking on additional
Yeah.
incremental growth.
And by the way, you totally do think about about acquisition costs and lifetime value. Like you have to think about those things.
Yeah,
But I tend to think about it in a little bit of like a longer term play,
right.
like
LTV is much bigger.
much longer, right? Like
Yeah,
actual long term, as opposed
yeah,
to because I sort of smile and go when some people go, oh, I'm worried about my like 18-month, 24-month return. I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about my 7 year return. Like
right,
that's
right,
actual long term.
right, right. And so technology changed a lot, obviously, from the knots to now. Um, and so the requirements of managed services changed a lot as people moved to cloud. Your security practices had to change. Everything's had to change. What did you do to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, so the trick there is to divorce process a little bit from technology.
Okay.
Everyone likes to talk about like that it's changed, so much has changed. But you know what really hasn't changed? And customers are really confused. They don't really know what they need. They need somebody to help them. And if you're good at helping them through the process, then they will keep buying from you.
Right.
Well, that's your core value is the helping, the advising,
Okay.
the I'm there for you. I help with budget planning. I help with, strategic thinking. I help link technology back to revenue. Like I
Yeah.
help link technology back to say cost reduction or top line revenue, or even just make sure that we're a moderate portion of the SG&A budget. Like by
Yeah.
linking technology to the business, that's your core value.
Yeah.
And yeah, the technology we use may change, but by the way, like you could really see it coming. Like it
Right.
we talked about
Yeah.
like cloud was apparent in '07.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
oh yeah,
well, yeah,
we're
yeah.
gonna right, we're gonna move this way. But most customers, like, we're still talking about cloud conversions in 2024.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
We got lots of time here, everybody. Like everybody
Well,
thinks everybody thinks this goes so much faster than it does in an actual rollout time frame. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm totally into AI, and I think there's a bunch of stuff that's going to happen. But mass adoption, oh, years away. Right now, the value is in literally helping customers make decisions about like what their ethical framework is going to be and how they're like what their data management practice is going to be. Like if you spend time there right now, you're making really great investments to help customers over the next couple of years.
data management practices for a small and medium-sized business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because,
Okay.
by the way, they're chaotic. They're totally
Yeah, yeah.
delightfully chaotic. It's amazingly fun, right?
Right.
But just a little bit of discipline will
Right.
help them get real value out of the data they have in their business, like literally helping them make sure that it isn't spread across everybody's laptop, that it is in
Right.
a place, and that there is some sort of that is indexable, searchable, queryable, like actually thinking about what we're storing, data retention policies, like just all of the basic data management stuff that enterprise organizations have thought about for a very long time
Had to. Yeah.
is still massively an area of opportunity right now in small business, and it's a prerequisite to AI.
Right. 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 And so are you finding yourself, oh, I guess, are you in the business still, by the way?
No, so I sold that business. I worked for a couple
Yeah.
software vendors to those businesses. So we sold software to managed services providers.
Yeah.
And my mission there was to help those businesses grow, because we knew that if they grew, they bought more software to serve customers. So the
Right.
better I could do at training them to run the businesses, to run a managed services practice, the more software they would consume. And that was my
Right.
job. And then I left
Okay.
those roles about 5 years ago to launch my media company. And now I literally spend my time doing just what we were talking about, which is advising managed services providers and IT services companies through a daily news podcast of what things are important to them, what technology and announcements are important, and at some level, what isn't.
Okay. Okay. And a lot of that has been, I noticed in the job descriptions in your LinkedIn profile, it was really a lot about building community in those roles and building channels.
Yes.
Now, was that your own direction, or was that something that was directed to you and you loved it? How did?
Uh, so for me, it's ultimately it's the realization of the way small and mid-sized businesses buy, right?
Okay,
So having done it as a decade, when I
that's
went
great.
over to the software vendor side, my
Yeah.
my discussions with them were like, look, the way you get into small companies is by understanding the dynamics of the people that are there, and oftentimes the advisor, particularly for technology, is an outside firm.
Right.
But it is much more like a community collection of people that you have to do a good job of influencing. Like we'd almost call it now influencing marketing, right? Like it would be the way that we think about it now. But it's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
community driven marketing too. It's all these new phrases for the same idea, and you have to influence the influencers.
Right.
And so my role was around making sure to help influence the influencers to get the directions that we wanted them to take.
Okay. So no longer going to the Chamber of Commerce to get the sale. It's building through the community, the trust factor that your services are going to be better.
Well, in particular, yeah, in particular when I was with the software firms to the managed services firms, right? So because
Right.
I don't want to show up at the every chamber of commerce. What I wanted to be is in all of the places that those managed services providers talk, to help make sure that I'm providing value in that community in a way that makes me more valuable and makes me more attractive than people that they might be talking to besides that.
Okay. So a lot of our listeners are trying to penetrate those markets. Can you walk us through what your best advice would be to a company selling a service and wanting to get to the small business market that, as you say, has sort of this outside advisor that you don't ever meet until it's too late because that outside advisor has another relationship with someone else. Can you walk us through some of that and what are the best tactics to on go to market for those kinds of relationships?
Yeah, I think about this space all the time because there's so many organizations, particularly products, and I mean that in the software sense too, like delivering software as
Right.
a service. But these are all products, right? So they're building
Right.
products and they want to get into this to the small business, and they often think like, well, I'll just go out there and advertise. I'll do a bunch of Google ads, and I'll do a bunch of and I will penetrate the small business market that way. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
okay, that's a component of that because you're going to get some awareness, but from a technology purchase perspective, those small business owners, particularly we think about lawyers, doctors, small not-for-profits, you think about small retail organizations, small manufacturing organizations, like they probably don't have a technology in-house department. Like they don't have an
Okay.
IT department. They've hired somebody. They've
Right.
hired a managed services provider or an IT services company to do that. And that person or organization is the key advisor for making decisions. And
Yeah,
they've got relationships with vendors that they work with on a regular basis, right? Because that's like how they do stuff. And so like that's the piece that you've got to sort of really think about when you're building that product is, well, how do I get awareness in that community? And
exactly.
that is, and we literally refer to it as the IT channel, right? That is the
Right.
indirect channel that is selling, that is advising on software purchases to the SMB. You've got to think about, how do I engage that IT channel and how do I make my stuff relevant? Are they going to make money by reselling me? Can I make, directly, like
Affiliate
reselling
program. Yeah,
product?
yeah,
Or are
yeah.
they going to make money on the services around me? Right. I
Right.
sell a product, but by the way, I don't care how your website says how easy your product is to do. Everybody needs help putting it together because it's got to integrate with the other portions of their business. Even just stringing it together, say with their QuickBooks and billing and accounting system or their email system.
Mhm.
Have you talked to a small business owner recently? They are not doing that themselves. They are
Right.
actually getting people to help them with that work.
Right.
And you have to be an influencer to those people too. And when you just sell only to the business owner, you're not getting in the ear of the advisor that matters.
So so where are these people hanging out? Obviously on your podcast.
Right.
Um,
I mean, I hope so. Right. But so they have they have communities themselves, right? They have conferences and they have discussion forums and they are constantly looking for new solutions. They have a distribution model themselves. Sometimes
yeah.
they'll work with a distributor to help them with technology investments. There's a
Mhm.
bunch of different
Mhm.
ways that they might be working here.
Mhm.
And so like you've got to make sure that you've thought about your channel strategy at some level. And by the way, you might decide you don't have one. I get it.
Yeah.
Like you might decide that you're purely saying you're not going to do that, but you may say, we're going to invest in building a program here that makes us attractive to the advisors to small business owners.
Right, right. And what have you seen has been the most successful approach in that? Has it been just increasing the revenue per sale for the commissionable revenue for that channel, or has it been hosting and being the best party at those conferences, or what have you seen very successful that came out of nowhere and got in and penetrated that market?
So ultimately, we got to start with the two headlines. You got to have a good product and you have to have really good support. And,
Okay.
and in particular, one of the things that I often challenge vendors that are thinking about this space is realize that the people that are doing support here are technical professionals that spend their entire time thinking about how we do IT support for small and mid-sized organizations. So
Right.
if you've got to make sure that you've got a technical support organization that can help them. The number
Okay.
one thing that I advise these
And that means
vendors
like
that are
telephone and every level at every hour.
every level, you got to know that when those people call in, they are asking really sharp, insightful questions faster than
Right.
most of your customers. If
Okay.
you, they have probably rebooted,
Right. Yeah, yeah,
like to
yeah,
make
yeah,
it really
exactly.
funny, right? They've already thought to reboot the
They've
system.
they've tried everything. Yeah, yeah. They've done
They've
all the
already tried
usual.
everything. So you've got to figure out a way to balance them. But know that the reason that they are valuable is that they represent a much larger cohort of customers. If
Hmm.
you think about the normally if you're selling into SMB, you're selling to a 10 or 15 person law firm, right? Well, you got to
Hmm.
grind those out. But if you get one managed services provider who supports between 40 and 80
Right.
small companies that are each 15 users, well, now we're talking, thousand
Scale.
right, thousand users under support from a single customer. Well, now
Right.
we're getting a little bit more interesting, right? In terms of the needs. But again, the downside is you're going to know that you're going to have to support them in a different way.
Right.
And so you've got to think about the fact that they are going to have that element of scale, but also know that they're supporting a diverse cluster of customers that
Mm.
they need to keep separate from one another, have different security needs, that kind of different piece you've
Right.
got to be prepared for. And we call it multi-tenancy, right? The
Yeah.
idea that one managed services provider then supports 40 to 80, 100, 1,000 different customers. Well, those are all individual tenants, and you have to have that level of scalability.
Right. Right. And what I've found and this may not be true, but I do find that in the smaller businesses where there's, I mean, you mentioned doctors, for example. I used to be in commercial real estate, and doctors were I hate to say it, the worst tenant building you could have because doctors know everything.
They are very smart
More about
people,
real estate than you're supposed to know, right?
and they'll remind you of how smart they are.
Exactly. And probably the lawyers the same thing. And they tend to think they don't necessarily value the service. So they're grinding the MSP on
Yes.
value, on cost. And so they sometimes go to the lowest cost provider, which then is, of course, is forcing anyone who services the MSP to go low, 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 as opposed to value and efficiency. Can you talk a bit about what you feel, what your feelings are around that, and how to work around it or to just work with it more efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is that there's something for everybody in the
Okay.
space, right? And so you can find, we often draw our graph of profitability among these, and look at the solution provider market. There
Right.
is a best in class community that maintains really great margins. They deliver on they sell on value. They work with high end customers. There's also about 30% of the market that is break even or losing money at any given moment because there's a lot of
Okay.
churn. Again, this is a small business kind of environment, so there's
Yeah.
churn, there's lots of learning, there's lots of problem, and then in the middle they've got 50% of the market or so, which is grinding it out in the middle, just like you talked about. And so you need to
Yeah.
think about the different levels of execution of the people that you'll be engaging with.
Right.
Obviously there are going to be some that maintain a high level of service and high margins, and you can play just in that space. Or you may say, what, we're going to do a bit of a volume game. We're going to make sure that we're accessible to everybody, and we're going to understand that grind, and we're
Mm.
going to make sure that we fit well in the way that they do business too, where potentially there is more pressure under margin. Now, the good news, most of the time, companies like what we're talking to right now that are listening to the show, likely more in the product and software side of things,
Mm.
likely you can retain a little bit more cushion because you're a product company versus a services company. Remember
Right.
that your customers, their number, these MSPs, their number one expense line item is labor.
Yes.
Not not it is labor by far. It isn't
100%.
the same kind of expense line items that you may have in a product organization. So it looks a little bit different. And that's good for you as a product organization because you're able to wedge in there, and you can have some pressure. You can take more pressure than the resellers that are working with your product can.
Okay. So let's actually, that's a great point because labor and technology, as we all know, is being made more efficient by AI. And how is AI affecting the MSPs?
It's early days, right?
Yeah.
So because in most cases MSPs, IT services companies, are implementers, not creators of technology. And what I
Sure.
mean by that is they are taking product sets, tool sets from a number of different vendors, and they're combining them and assembling them into to offer complete solutions to their customers.
Mhm.
Most of what's happening in AI right now is being built and integrated into products. So we're a little
Mhm.
downstream from the implementers because we're
Right.
still kind of building all the stuff, and only the really large companies are at the position of actually doing rollouts. I talk about Microsoft and their Copilot product all the time,
Yeah.
right? That's being rolled out, but even that's pretty early days, right? Like it's
Yeah.
still a
Yeah.
lot of people figuring it out. We've got a lot of people figuring out how to do something with it versus
Okay.
like having locked and loaded on what solutions it's solving. So it's still a little early days. In particular, where we're looking at where they're finding value is in the same places that a lot of companies are. Helping with marketing copy, helping with automation
Yeah.
of email, like some of the generative AI kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
also seeing benefits in security and automation
Okay.
generation. So for our
Okay.
ability to, look at cybersecurity data and synthesize it is rolling out very quickly among cybersecurity products. We're also seeing it in our ability to do, because it does coding really well, we can
Hmm.
do automation of IT tasks. So
Hmm.
it's much easier to write a PowerShell script, for example, to automate some trivial IT task than it was 48 months ago.
Right.
Like we're in a much better place. So we're seeing acceleration there, but it is still early days
Yeah.
because fully baked products aren't in market yet.
Correct. Okay. One of the, but support, for example, which you said labor is the biggest cost for these MSPs. Surely those pattern recognition in problems associated with integrations and the service have to be something that has been, there's enough data on those kinds of questions at an aggregated basis that you could have significant automated support in AI. Have you seen any of that?
It's coming. It's
Okay.
we're seeing lots of flashes of it, and we're seeing the tool providers that work here implementing at different speeds and implementing in different ways. It's super exciting, right? It's a great
Yeah,
time to be in this because it's changing things up. But I wouldn't say that anything is fully baked right now,
right.
particularly at the, particularly for the SMB and mid market. Uh,
Okay.
Exciting. People that figure it out and try new things are gonna do really interesting and profitable stuff, but
Yeah.
it's not quite fully baked yet.
Yeah. You do not want the chatbot hallucinating about how to fix
No, not
an
really. There's some, I mean,
integration
we can
with
have some
data
fun with,
security.
yeah, we can have some, there's been some fun, interesting things that have gone off the rails in terms of what we're seeing with some of those chatbots. But by the way, it is helping in the back end in some help desks, for example. So
Right.
we can give it to engineers and we can say, on a small help desk, and we can say, hey, use the chatbot to help with your diagnostics because it will help point you at ideas. Use, to point a generative, chatbot at my manual documentation, and be able to synthesize answers a little bit better, pointing it at our
Right.
knowledge bases and saying, hey, I'm having this problem, what does this look like? And it can do a good job of helping engineers move a little bit faster. We're seeing stuff like that, but it is still, I would still say it's early days.
Okay. Okay. And I guess, I mean, you'd be feeding it the manuals and all that documentation. Would those manuals and documentation even be up to date with the current versions of the products is a good question, right? Does that,
Right. And that's the trick, right? Is a lot
right.
of this stuff is linking all the data sets together and making sure that that's not as perfect as we'd like it to be. And by the way, you still have to manage some hallucinations and you have to
Yeah. Yeah.
so there's enough here that it's still a little bit of work. But by the way, one of the interesting things we're seeing particularly around AI is that a lot of AI is being introduced by workers themselves.
Okay.
And so a lot of managed services providers are working with their clients right now to combat what we call shadow IT, which is
Okay.
this idea of IT that's implemented by the staff without true blessing from management and and their policies. And AI has done a really nice job of accelerating that process because now there's a lot of AI tools that are also being used by workers that are trying to accelerate their work.
Hmm.
Isn't quite ready or doesn't necessarily have all the security that we want in place, or we haven't thought about data security. Like there's all these open questions. So there's a lot of need right now for managed services providers to help with this accelerated shadow IT.
Interesting. As thought leadership in terms of that area. Yeah.
Yeah, and stuff we can do to monitor that and do a better job of helping small business owners understand what technology is being used in their environment. That's
Mhm.
another area where managed services providers are leaning in.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And are you seeing, I mean, it's because of what you just said, it being in early stages in terms of implementation and success rates, still to be proven out. But are you seeing, but the market expectation of the impact of AI on business operations is now, hitting that stratosphere level
Oh, it's pretty
where,
significant. It's pretty significant, but the trick is the time frames, right? So we're not talking about it massive in 2024. We're talking about acceleration in 2025 with big impacts in 26 and 27.
right.
See my earlier statements about cloud moved slower than we thought.
Yeah.
This
No,
this is
exactly. That's where I was going to. Exactly where I
yeah,
was going to. So, I mean, there's still digital transformation. There's still on-prem servers that are being transferred into the cloud.
right, exactly. So we'll just add
2024. Everyone in IT thought it was going to happen in 2006. So AI, same thing. Market expectation. This is going to save me so much money. I won't need. And this is where the next question is: are there cost pressures from clients starting to say, "Hey, you don't need to be so expensive because you don't need as many people because of AI helping you. Why aren't you transferring that savings into my operations?" And they're way ahead of where it's actually at. Are you seeing that?
yeah, particularly in cloud, right? We're seeing a lot of back pressure on cloud.
Okay.
I say this with love of being a technologist. We
Yeah.
always promise faster, cheaper, and cheaper is never what we actually deliver.
Right.
IT spend has gone up very reliably every single year as long as I've been doing this, and I'm
Yes.
confident it extends further back. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
IT spend always goes up. We always find a way to spend all of the customers' money and do more, right? It's just a reality of this. And so there has been some pushback recently, particularly around cloud, to say, hey, my cloud bill keeps going up.
Right.
My cloud bill keeps getting more and more, keeps getting higher. So I'm expecting, this will play out where you've got to be doing a better job. And this is the advice we're giving managed services providers. You got to be doing a better job of linking technology spend back to business outcomes, being able to
Hmm.
show that, look, for every dollar you spend, you're getting a buck 25 back. Like
Okay.
that kind of
1 to
spend.
25.
Well, I'm using that as
That's a
a
big.
right. If you can achieve those numbers, you're doing really well. I have
Yeah.
a model that I talk about with people that call it my good, better, best model
Yeah.
of linking back. It's good to just be an SG&A, right? Like you, everybody knows they need technology, right? You got to
Right.
have some computers,
Right.
right? You can't be a modern business without this stuff. You do a good job, you deliver service and a high value service, and you live in SG&A and a P&L. Life is okay, right? Life is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Better is when we do a good job of helping with cost reduction. When we can
Okay.
actually show the technology investment helps reduce some of my costs. And in particular, if I can do it in costs of goods sold, like directly on the things that we're out selling for that customers, our
Yeah.
customers are
Yeah.
selling to
Logistics,
their,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, we can do good. The best is when we can tie it to revenue. Like, so for
Right.
example, when you can actually show, say, a not for profit, you can say, hey, through this technology investment, you are now doing 25% more membership acquisitions in your association than you were previously. That 25% increase that can be directly tied back to technology at a revenue level,
Hmm.
that's best. We love that.
Yeah.
Right. And so so the better you are at doing that process of tying back to a profit and loss statement, the better you'll do.
Right. Which means you really have to be integrated as a partner into the business.
Very much so. I mean,
Yeah.
very much so. And oftentimes the best managed services providers are sitting at the table. Like they are part of the management team, just an
Right.
outsourced piece. They're helping control budgets. Like they are
Right.
not just, and this isn't just the owner says, hey, I'm giving you a line item. No, they're helping to justify the line item, building out the next, say, 1 to 2 to 3 year technology spend for the SMB. Like if you think about that small law practice, right? Who actually
Yeah.
is working with a provider who is providing with them a detailed budget for their next 3 years of technology spend. That's a great advisor. But for your listeners, that's somebody you may not have thought about that you've got to influence.
Yeah. That's a rare breed of MSP too, because in the organization, you think of the MSP as, hey, they're handling my technology services. They're managing all the integrations. I know my business. And truthfully, the people who are actually executing on the technology side of it are technical people. They're not necessarily business people. So to have that combination, you're talking about two different people, I'm assuming. One who's sitting at the table
or
and one
or,
who's
or,
actually
organiz- or an organization. Like I'm looking at
yeah,
it saying like there are MSPs that have achieved some level of significant scale now.
right,
With both regional or national or international that focus on the SMB. We're not talking about those
right,
big, Capgem,
yeah,
CGI. Like we're not talking about that. There are ones with national footprints now that have achieved that level of size with that level of expertise, and so they've got teams, right? They've got account
right,
manager type teams with
right,
business analysts. They've got help desk. They've got network engineers. They've got security engineers. Like they've got
yeah,
this entire outsourced IT department,
yeah,
literally the promise, right? But that IT department includes CISO services, CTO services, all delivered virtually.
right. So I'm going to go back to your experience on the business side of growing the company, then selling the company. What inspired you to sell the company? Did somebody come knock on your door and you said yes? Was it the right time? Were you looking for it? Let's talk about a bit about that.
Yeah, so for me it's a very personal, and I think for many entrepreneurs it's kind of a personal decision, right?
Okay.
Is I've been doing the business about 10 years, and it's a good solid business. I love that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love the managed services space because it's a good solid business. As I've alluded to, it's also not like, you not that infinite scale. I'm gonna grow it up and have some kind of massive IPO pop. Like it's not that
Right,
kind of
right,
thing,
right, right. It's
right?
it's
It's
a, it's a coupon clipper and
Yeah, it's a good cash machine, right? Like
right.
and like you like that kind of thing. But I've been doing it 10 years and actually had some internal staffing woes where I had two
Okay.
key staff members leave, right? And as
Okay.
any entrepreneur knows, that's a moment of reflection, right? You take that moment, you say, well, what am I going to do now? And for me, the decision was, I don't think I've got another 10 years in me of this.
Right.
I was staring at I'm staring at a birthday that ended in zero. But it was a younger one. But I said, if I add another number to that first digit, I was looking at 40. If I'm looking at 50, I want to be doing this at 50?
Yeah.
Probably not. I think I want to
Right.
be doing something else. Uh,
Okay.
okay. And I said, okay, so based on that, if I don't have that next arc in me, what
Hmm.
should I do? And my major key insight at that point was, when you lose two management positions, that actually makes you more valuable as an acquisition target
Why?
because,
You
well,
got
because you come with customers,
yeah.
doers of the work, and not managers that have to be retrained.
Right.
I can
Okay.
sell to another
That's
organization
interesting.
that can bring in their management style against my customer base
Okay.
and implement it.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that. That's a very insightful
And
piece there.
I had that moment and I said, you know what? This is an asset.
Right.
Like I've got young junior frontline engineers that are eager
Right.
to do the work.
Right.
And I don't have as many managers right now.
Okay.
Huh.
Huh.
Let's give it to somebody who can take that raw piece, impose their own standards, their own management style, and if we do this right, it'll work. And they'll get value and I can walk away.
And
Um,
so can you give perspective on how big the business was and whether or not as a services company, because like we do talk about scale and it's really stacking and not churning that
yeah.
help build the business. What kind of top line revenue or
Yeah,
EBITDA?
so at its biggest, my firm was 1.4 million in annualized contract value.
Okay. Okay.
Right? So it's a pretty good book of business, right? When you're
Yeah.
doing that in recurring revenue. It was a little smaller when I sold.
Yeah.
And so we did a really good deep dive. And I took the open the kimono style approach with this, even
Yeah.
as we signed NDAs, because of course
Yeah.
that's a smart thing to do. But the
Yeah.
moment the NDA was signed, there was no hemming and hawing and holding information back. I gave
Right.
them full access to everything.
Best
Gave
way
them
to approach a sale.
Gave them my QuickBooks
100%.
file, gave them all my
Yeah.
contracts.
Nobody likes a surprise at the end of the day.
No, exactly. And I said the best way to beat due diligence is just like show everything, right? Like here
Yeah.
is
The data
every
room.
yeah, here's every little dirty secret I've ever done. And I was pointing things out. Oh, I screwed that up. Oh, this one's bad. Oh, that contract's a problem. Like I'm trying to give them as much information as possible for
Mhm.
them to do an assessment. And we actually worked on they actually adjust the sales price in my favor after through that process because
Really?
really because of the way that we did it. And they actually sort of said there's actually a little bit more of value here that you would undervalue. Uh,
Wow.
and it was a really good collaborative process, right? Again, a couple of small business guys sitting in a room
Yeah.
figuring out how to do a deal. It's the
Right.
best possible way to do this stuff.
There's
Uh,
no broker involved. You
no,
didn't,
it was another local firm that I knew. We
okay.
had been they every year they took me out to lunch and always like, one day we're gonna buy you, Dave. And okay,
Okay. Okay.
it was a
Okay with that.
friendly kind of engagement. And that year it was the year I called them and said, today this is apparently the year.
Okay. Okay. And and did you have a sense of EBIT of multiples that were current markets for? for
Yeah,
you?
I had done my due diligence to get a sense of that. It was a healthy multiple on EBITDA, and we did the deal on EBITDA.
Okay.
And it was done. The structure of the deal was a down payment and a payment over time on retention.
Okay.
It was the way we structured the deal. It was a two-year deal. Both of us then thus incentivized to keep the customers.
Yeah.
And I closed out that deal early. They paid me. I was paid off ahead of schedule.
Okay.
Uh, and that's. I mean, I'm looking in the rearview mirror. That's the deal was about 13 years ago. I couldn't tell you how many clients are still there, but I
Okay.
do know at least one staff member still there, built his entire career there.
Wow.
And
That's good.
so, and the measurement that I had used was 3 years post closing. They
Yeah.
had retained 80% of the customer base, and all of the staff that went over volunteer who had chosen to go over were still there 3 years post the deal.
Good friendly buy. That's good. That's
Very much
good.
so. And it was all about like just no egos. Check your like this is all just
Yeah.
numbers and deals, and like we've got to work together to make sure that all of the people portion of this
Mhm.
works. Are the
Right.
staff going to want to do it? Are the clients going to be okay? Are we
So
communicating
important.
really well? Like all
Yeah.
the stuff that matters,
Mm.
that's the stuff that keeps retention really high. And by the
Right.
way, to my earlier piece, that's the only way the multiple continues is if you're
Sure.
doing a really good job of retention. And so we lose anybody during this process, the
Value.
deal value starts falling apart.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So I'll skip the next level of employment and go into the media space. So you decide to start this media company.
Yep.
You start everything. Every media company starts off as a one-man show, sitting in his basement making podcasts, right?
And I'm still in my basement making podcasts. I got more.
But your audience is growing massively. So why media and not more, leadership in the space and, a job in the space where you'd be handsomely paid for that? Because media is a hard thing to start building a revenue base from.
Maybe I'm a little crazy. So it's so putting in the head is 2019, right?
Yeah.
And I looked at the media space covering managed services and IT services. And I
Right.
said, like, and I kind of draw this triangle and I would say, like, well, look, the business press is like allergic to services. They love
Right.
Silicon Valley. They love
It's
big
true. It's very
companies. They
true,
love
actually. Yeah.
IPOs,
Yeah.
right? They're like allergic to services. Nobody ever wants to talk about services.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the tech press is like the same way. They're like allergic to services, right? It's
Sure.
and then I looked at the players that are in my space. I said the one insight for me was, wow, they're kind of doing new media badly. Like
Right.
none of them were doing YouTube. None of them were doing a good podcast. It was I didn't think I thought maybe it's just again my ego came out like when I was younger again. It's just like I can do a better job than those guys. Like
Yeah.
I think I've got a more interesting version of a voice and a perspective on this that I can deliver some real aggregation value. Like I think my big value to my listeners is I take all this news, I aggregate it out for them, and then I layer on informed perspective.
Gotcha.
And even if you completely disagree with me, you get value of the aggregation, right?
Right.
It's so,
Right.
and then you get a perspective to at least inform your own decision because, and I
Right.
know that like, there's a million ways to solve the problem, so I don't have to be right. I just have to like be directionally right.
So you're
It's
like the G2 of managed services.
well, that was kind of the idea
Yeah.
was looking at that. And I said, I also know that the value of the audience is very high. These are
Right.
technology buyers, like these are technology influencers. It's
Right.
very difficult for people to get their message to those people.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I could put ads in my show. Like
Right.
it was the like, well, I could do that, right? Like I could, and if I grow the audience, and if I really respect the audience, and if I really think every single day, like, am I delivering something of good value to them that they'll spend 7 to 10 minutes listening to a show, and probably I know they all listen at 1.5, so it's maybe 5 minutes, right? Like, like, can I deliver enough value that they'll keep doing that? And I was like, yeah, I bet I can. And to your point, like, how can I get a more interesting reach, like thought leadership wise? Well, this is like almost the best way to get a long-standing, really good, valuable reach is do
Right.
it this way independently. And it was very much a long-term play. I said, yeah, it's probably going to be really rough the first 2 or 3 years. But I bet in the end, I'll be a voice people listen to. And I'm confident that'll have better long-term value. Like I can
Right.
continue to be relevant over the course of my career with a more respected voice if I do this. And by the way, then the pandemic hit and a bunch of marketing dollars needed a place to go.
Ah, okay.
So we're all trapped in our houses,
And the
but there's
voice
still all this technology marketing spend, and people want to get their message out
even more so. Yeah.
even more so. Well, now I have the #1 podcast and YouTube channel in the IT services space
Perfect.
because, right, and so you always have to acknowledge there's a little bit of luck, right? Your right time, the timing was really good.
That's good. That's good. Well, the right person in the right place. I mean, you've got a great personality for podcasting,
Well, thank you.
and you've definitely got the experience. So, what would you say? I mean, congratulations, fifth anniversary this year.
Yes, it'll be 5 years in October.
All right. And what are you going to do to celebrate the fifth anniversary?
More podcasts. You know, I think, honestly, it'll end up being a bit of an acknowledgement of the audience. I should cross 1 million downloads before the anniversary. So that's kind of the like, and we've crossed it over on the YouTube side already. 1 million views already on the YouTube side, and not
Excellent.
quite there on the audio side. So it should happen. And I think that'll be the big moment acknowledgement, and it's all due to the audience. Like it's all just the fact that they're here listening.
Well, it helps. It helps. You've got a great moderator and great information. So, congratulations, Dave. A massive accomplishment
Well,
and a
thank you.
massive transition.
You know what? Be a little disruptive sometimes. You shake up your own life a little bit, you can have an awful lot of fun. And any entrepreneur knows that, right? Like sometimes you just have to be willing to take the jump,
Yeah.
and know that you just gotta go for it and keep iterating. Like, I listen back to my first shows and I don't sound so great, and they're not quite so insightful.
Yeah.
Practice does make perfect. You do a couple thousand shows and you get good at it eventually.
Right, right. And that's the question, I guess. I mean, you're an expert in the show. You've been an expert in MSP. You have a nice combination of the two. But everybody's going podcasting right now, right? So you've got a massive long tail. I mean, if you're not TikTok, you're podcast. Like,
Fair. Right.
depending on age group. So what are the biggest lessons you learn in podcasting for growing a business that you can help our listeners with?
So the know your audience. Like I think #1 thing is really, really think about your audience. There's 1 million podcasts, right? And most of them don't do very well because they don't know who they want to talk to and what they want to talk about.
Right,
Right. It's like two guys go like, I'm gonna do like a podcast, and then me and my buddy are funny and we'll just talk.
yeah,
And it's like, well, what value? I mean, I can
right.
be super specific about who my podcast is.
Mm,
My podcast is targeted to generally people in the US and Canada who are interested in the delivery of IT services and managed services, ideally run one of those organizations or are related to those functions. I do think there's some value in what I do for internal IT and for small business owners,
sure,
but my
100%.
focus is the technology
Is
deliver organizations.
yeah,
I happen to know the demographics of them, that they tend to be 50 something white males, like as a general rule. But I'll also say
not
that,
Indians.
well, yeah, but I also say that I spend some time thinking about the next generation of those people.
Right.
I've not hit 50 yet. So I spent a little bit of time thinking about turning to Gen Z and millennials to say,
Yeah.
like, I'm going to make sure to talk in that tone, try not to
Right.
get too wrapped up in too many three-letter acronyms
Yeah. Yeah.
and assuming everybody looks like, like me and older white guys, and think a little bit about how it sounds to a younger generation to make sure that I'm expanding that voice. But everything I've just said to advice is I know exactly who I'm talking to, and I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about the persona really deeply so that I can be very, very relevant to those people. So my #1 advice, like coming out of this, is my success came from knowing that audience, talking to them in a way that speaks their language and
Right.
delivers real value every single day, and ideally more value than I cost.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. And then I wanted to unpack a bit what you just said about the next generation. I mean, in all businesses, all SMEs across North America, around the world, is this challenge of intergenerational change. That the older generation, the kids don't want to do that business. They don't want to be a bricklayer. They don't want to be a restaurant owner. They don't want to be whatever it is, car wash operator. They don't want to, and so in MSP, are you seeing a potential for a problem with that pickup from the next generation?
I think I'll challenge your premise a little bit.
Okay.
I wouldn't, because I wouldn't agree that that generation doesn't want to do those jobs. What I'm going to say
Okay.
is maybe they just don't want to do it the way
Their
we
parents did
did
it. Yeah, yeah.
it.
Okay.
Right?
That's yeah,
And
that's good.
and so this is the bit where I smile and go, I like to have some fun with this. Who said I was right to do it the way I did it?
Right.
There isn't one way to do this. I'm in technology because I like things that get disrupted.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't my own space like be open to that? And why wouldn't I want to be along for the ride for the new ideas or advising and giving guidance to those that are trying to be disruptive? And I think I also go back to the core premise, right? Like we talked about this right earlier in our discussion. I think about the value of an MSP in the advice and guidance given.
Hmm.
It's a really human thing.
Yeah.
People want to help other people,
Right.
right? That problem is really key. And the young
Right.
people actually want to help almost more. Like they're more mission driven in some ways than a lot of other people. And so if you focus on what the mission is and you
Hmm.
help them do that, they're going to come up with new creative ways to do it and outdream me in terms of the way this might be done, but the
Right.
core mission hasn't changed. The way
Fair
they
enough.
execute it on might not. And we could even pick on some of those other industries and say, like, I don't think restaurants are going away. I don't think car
No, no,
washes are going
restaurants are
away.
going away
Right.
for sure.
I think they may come up with new, cool, interesting ideas. And I guess I look at it and say, I don't want to be the curmudgeon shaking my fist at the cloud. And instead, I want to be the a little bit of gray hair that listens and goes, I want to know more about that idea.
Right. Good for you. Well, that's why were able to transition from operator, owner to employee and driver of business to a media guru.
Here's the hope. Here's the hope. But it's,
It's the curiosity.
I am I know we have real challenges, but I am more excited about the younger generations than ever before. My interactions with them are smart. They
Yeah.
ask great questions. They're
Yeah.
thoughtful. They think about way bigger issues than I did at that age.
Yeah.
like they have they've they've taken in the lessons we've taught them about like living a full life and and having interest in being whole people and being interesting and like challenging ideas. Like they've internalized all that stuff. It's awesome. like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
look at it and say, like, why not embrace that and help channel and invest in the future by leaning into it.
Yeah, I guess that's the point. You're absolutely right that, and I find them really good hackers at finding creative, resourceful solutions that are way more efficient than anything I would have ever done. So that's absolutely true. There's a great opportunity there. I just wondered how many of them are going into the MSP space as opposed to going into a cool SaaS tech company, and whether there's a labor issue in this MSP space.
There certainly is still growth in this space, and what's
Yeah.
interesting is that there are new emerging companies coming on all the time. Some of them are buying the older legacy companies,
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably a lot
because
of
by the way, a lot
acquisition.
of people have been at this for a long time. I know
Yeah.
business owners in the managed services space, 30-year owners, 40-year owners. They're ready to retire.
Right.
Right. And so, these younger owners can purchase those organizations, can help grow them. There's lots of exit strategies now for them. I'm encouraged with what I'm seeing in the space, not worried about it shrinking.
Cool. Cool. Well, my guest, Dave, is going to be advisor on a PE firm that does a roll up of all these smaller organizations.
I am available for advisory services. I do not mind saying
Sure,
it.
that's going to be a good push. All right, well, Dave, thank you so much for all your advice. And is there anything I didn't ask that I should have asked that you'd like to share with?
Sean, this has been great, and I would really tell those thinkers that are thinking about the SMB space, you really do need to think about what your strategy is to deliver in the SMB space through the advisory network that is generally for technologists through managed services providers. You got to have a strategy. That strategy might be we don't engage, like that could, but it's an intentional decision versus not. And I think that would be the one thing I would want people to take away from this conversation.
Okay. Well, Dave, and can you do a pitch for your podcast right here, right now?
Of course, I appreciate that. I do 7 shows a week. So in terms of so there's news shows, there's interview shows, and a live show. If people have questions, you can actually show up and ask me questions right on a live stream. All the links to everything I do are at businessof.tech. There's a big blue subscribe button to follow on your podcast platform of choice. That is the most helpful thing that people can do that are interested in learning more, is just follow the podcast and pick and choose the episodes you want to listen to.
Dave, you can count me as a new listener too.
Oh, thanks,
Thanks,
John. This has been great.
and have a great day.